Okay, good evening. Let us begin. Today's topic discusses the importance of self-esteem and how it affects the well-being of our children, both in the positive and in the negative. Now, self-esteem has become more of a focus lately as we become more prosperous, as we become more comfortable. And the reason for this was explained by actually a Jewish philosopher, a psychologist named Abraham Maslow, who said that he formulated what's called a hierarchy of needs. And in his hierarchy of needs, he says that in order to the most basic needs like safety, shelter, food need to be met. And once those are met, then a person will seek more deep personal needs, more refined needs, more advanced needs like friendship. And then and finally, the highest of those would be self-actualization, feeling like you are a meaningful human being. And so, whereas in previous generations, people were struggling to provide or to achieve the most basic of needs, in that sense, and when that's the case, self-esteem is not a concern. Now, in today's day and age, with Hashem's help, Baruch Hashem, we have, most of us can say that we take for granted basically these basic issues of safety and shelter, food, clothing, and therefore, as a result, which is a positive result, we become more concerned, more focused on issues such as where am I in the world and how much do I matter and things like that. And that's self-esteem. Self-esteem on this level is something that affects every aspect of life. And it's something that needs to be nurtured in order to be achieved. Matthew McKay writes in his book, Self-Esteem, that it's essential for psychological survival. When a person judges and rejects themselves, that causes enormous pain. And in the same way that you would favor and protect a physical wound, you find yourself avoiding anything that might aggravate the pain of self-rejection in any way. And what happens is, he says, a person will take fewer social, academic, or career risks because I don't believe that I'm going to accomplish it, and because I don't want to expose this wound that I have of not having a solid self-esteem. He goes on to say that you make it more difficult for yourself to meet people, interview for a job, or push hard for something where you might not succeed. And you limit your ability to open yourself with others, to be the center of attention, to hear criticism, to ask for help, or to solve problems. Hearing any criticism for the person who has a fragile, not such a strong self-esteem feels very dangerous to them. And what happens is that he goes on to explain, to avoid more judgments and self-rejection, you erect barriers of defense. Perhaps you blame and get angry or bury yourself in perfectionist work, or you brag, or you make excuses, and sometimes people even turn to alcohol or drugs to escape the pain of this not having a self-esteem, not having a solid self-esteem. An interesting point made here is that perfectionism is, in a sense, a result of not feeling good about yourself, because I have to constantly prove to myself that I'm good enough. And so as he demonstrates here, self-esteem is not an issue in life. It's the foundation to how a person will present themselves and function in the world. And it also, self-esteem also relates to not only our practical success in life, it also relates to our spiritual success in life. And there's a beautiful teaching from Rav Tzadok HaKohen in his sefer called Tzidkot HaTzadik, where he writes as follows: just as we have to believe in God, we must then believe in ourselves. We have to believe that God cares about us, that we are not just worthless laborers, that we possess divine souls, and that God takes pleasure and joy when we fulfill his desires. Essentially, here, Rav Tzadok HaKohen is teaching that essential to our spiritual sense of self is a deep sense of self-worth that's rooted in the fact that God cares about me and God needs me, and that God celebrates with me in my achievements and accomplishments. On the other hand, if I don't have this spiritual sense of self-worth, that can lead to not challenging myself spiritually, because essentially I don't matter. So to summarize, self-esteem is fundamental and necessary both for our material well-being as well as for our spiritual well-being. A negative consequence of having a negative self-esteem is the unfortunate phenomenon of bullying. And before we talk about what the relationship between self-esteem is, let's first talk about what bullying is. Or before we talk about the relationship between self-esteem and bullying, let's first talk about what bullying is. So, some possible scenarios. Let's take a guess as to whether these would qualify as bullying. A 6-year-old who consistently grabs toys from their 5-year-old sibling. Is that bullying? What do you think? A 12-year-old is part of a clique that regularly humiliates the less popular kids. Do you think that's bullying? And a third example, a 9-year-old gets upset and physically lashes out at their siblings, hitting and kicking. Is that bullying? So the United States government has a website called stopbullying.gov. Now, I don't necessarily agree with some of the prescriptions that they make, but the analysis of what bullying is bears looking at. They say, bullying is unwanted aggressive behavior among school-age children, in this case, that involves a real or perceived power imbalance. Bullying behavior is repeated or has the potential to be repeated over time. And both kids who are bullied and kids who bully are likely to have serious, lasting problems. And so, in order to be considered bullying, there has to be two qualities here. Number one, it represents an imbalance of power. That is, a child is using their stronger physical strength or their stronger popularity to control or harm others. The second quality is that it's repetitive. It happens consistently over time. It happens more than once, or it has the potential to happen more than once. So when we look back at those examples of the different scenarios that we brought earlier, while a 6-year-old child who's consistently grabbing toys from their 5-year-old sibling, there is the component of the power imbalance. The 6-year-old is going to be larger and stronger than the 5-year-old. And it is consistent, and yet it may be bullying, but in this case, it would depend on what the intention of the child is. The other example, the 9-year-old who gets upset and physically hits their siblings or other children that they're playing with, there is the power imbalance there. In that case, it may be repetitive, but it also may not be as a result of a child's power imbalance. In those two cases, it may simply be either poor impulse control or poor conflict negotiation skills. So I want the toy, but I don't know how to navigate getting the toy, and so I grab it. Again, if the intent is simply to show who's boss, that would be bullying behavior. But if the intent is simply, I want the toy, and I would like to, if I would know how to work it out, I would, that wouldn't be bullying. Similarly, if the child is lashing out physically, just because they're hitting doesn't make it bullying. That can simply be the child having poor impulse control, not practicing self-control, and having perhaps high reactability, and where and perhaps poor boundaries. In these cases, very simply, the approach to this isn't to deal with it as bullying. The approach of it is simply to tell them, no, we don't hit, right? And then to work with the child to understand what they can do instead. Offer alternatives for the child instead of grabbing or instead of hitting. Some examples that I'll do with my children is I will say to them, why don't you talk to your sibling about when it will be your turn to have the toy? And something that we found very successful was coaching them to negotiate about how much more time their sibling would be playing with the toy, and to agree on an amount of time, and then to hold the other sibling accountable to that toy. And often what may happen is, after having, sometimes they really like the toy and they will come back. Let's say they agree on 5 more minutes or 10 more minutes. They'll come back after the 5-10 minutes, and they may need guidance on how to look at the clock and know when it's 10 minutes. And both of them may need that guidance. And sometimes they'll simply forget about it because they found something else to do at that during those 5 or 10 minutes. And similarly, when somebody hits, again, first of all, it's simply a matter of laying down the boundaries, saying we don't hit. That's not acceptable, like we talked about last week. And then to talk about what can you do when you're angry, when you're upset. Tell them you don't like what they did. What are you upset about? Instead of hitting, we say, I don't like what you're doing. And this is, by the way, as a side note, there's a really important difference between saying stop that and I don't like it. And this is something I tell my children all the time. Saying stop it implies that I'm the boss of you and you should stop doing it because I said stop. And that often doesn't work between children who want to perceive themselves as equals. And here we're getting again to that power imbalance issue. Whereas when one child tells another, I don't like what you're doing, that invites the other child to stop because they want to be a good person. And they'll do that of their own accord. They'll stop because, and it's something that needs to be reinforced. I don't like it when you, right? So I tell my children, what do we say? And they already know. I don't like it when you tease me. I don't like it when you touch my things. Whatever it is. And sometimes I will also point out to the child that you don't have a right to tell your sibling that you don't like that. They have a right to, what they're doing is not inappropriate. Sometimes, for example, a child will say, I don't like it when you sing that song. You can't complain that your sibling is singing a song, right? So we offer the alternative. You can go somewhere else if you don't like hearing the song. So again, once we identify whether the issue is about power, control, or simply poor impulse control or poor skills, we come to the third scenario that we brought up, which was the clique that is regularly humiliating the less popular kids. In this case, it isn't physical, it's only emotional, but it's particularly around showing who's boss, who's in the popular group, and who's the loser, simply trying to make someone else feel like a loser. And that is much more in the realm of bullying. The reality is that research shows that kids who experience bullying and also kids who do bully are more likely to experience all kinds of negative circumstances, negative symptoms such as depression, anxiety, sadness, loneliness, changes in sleep and eating patterns, and that and those who have been bullied, or even those who did participate in bullying, these memories and these experiences persist well into adulthood. It also can affect school grades. And the negative patterns where a child who feels loss of control or lack of control the kinds of things that they may do in order to gain that feeling of control can also be very detrimental. And the kids who bully also are more likely to be in trouble with the law and to engage in dangerous behaviors and in risky behaviors. And again, without having had those firm boundaries established and without having dealt with their inner work, this is going to be, again, a deficit in that child, something that's incomplete in that child well into adulthood, because if it's not resolved, it isn't resolved. And so we want to pay attention to our children, both to whether they are engaging in bullying or whether they are being bullied, because again, in both cases, it's not good for them. So now to go to the relationship between bullying and self-esteem, where we talk about, so what I want to say first of all is that what I'm going to say now is not an absolute rule. There's no one reason that people are prone to being victims of bullying or prone to being a bully, prone to engaging in bullying behavior. But one prominent factor is the lack of self-esteem. And this can show up in the bully, in the child, sorry, not the bully, the child who engages in bullying behavior. Because a child isn't a bully. They are doing, and we'll talk about that in a moment, they're doing bullying behavior. In some cases, they may be trying to boost their self-esteem and to make themselves feel more powerful because they don't feel inherently powerful inside. And similarly, the child who is more at risk to reacting to bullying may also be because of, or may be due in part to their lack of self-esteem, because they will believe the negative messaging. They are more likely to react negatively to insults and things like this because they're more fragile. Of course, being different is another major factor. If a child is identifiably different, children who are looking for a boost to their self-esteem may often pick on someone who's different because they believe that child is less likely to have allies. Another factor which I think is important to mention, even though it doesn't necessarily fit into this subject, is the issue of emotional reactivity. Some children are, and in regards to this, I'm talking specifically about the children who are more prone to experiencing bullying from others. Emotional reactivity is, there are some children who are simply more sensitive, in the sense that when something is experienced as negative, their emotions are stronger. And it may be hard for them to think cool, calm, and collected, and to come up with a smart reply or a deflection, or to avoid, because the emotions become so strong that they become overwhelmed and they can't respond skillfully. And to this, I recommend a program called Bullies to Buddies, which is a program led by a man named Izzy Kalman out of Israel, actually, but he teaches over Zoom, and he coaches children in skills about how to look at, how to turn around these interactions from being a negative one into a positive one, to give that child a sense of control in that moment, and that they don't look at themselves as a victim of the person doing bullying behavior, but rather see them as somebody who just said something silly or stupid. He coaches kids to make it into a joke, or to shrug it off, or even to compliment the child who's doing bullying behavior in response to their insult, as a way of diffusing the situation. And so this is, I think, a helpful program. It's worth looking into if this is an issue. If your child is experiencing having negative experiences due to other people's bullying. Excellent program, highly recommended. Bullies to Buddies. At the same time, what may help to counteract the effects of bullying, or the temptation of a child to bully, or what may counteract those negative effects, those self-esteem crushing experiences, is to build up a positive self-esteem. And for this, a nice story from we talked last week about the Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe. Here's a story about his father when he was a child. So Rav Shalom Ber, when he was a child, he had a brother whose name was Zalman Aaron, and he was referred to in his adulthood as Reb Zalman Aaron Raza, an acronym for Reb Zalman Aaron. And the story goes, Reb Zalman Aaron was older than Rav Shalom Dov Ber, but he was shorter. And it always bothered the Raza that his younger brother was taller than him. So the story goes that one time the Raza sneaked up behind his brother, Rav Shalom Dov Ber, who later grew up to be the fifth Rebbe of Lubavitch, and pushed him into a ditch. And as Rav Shalom Dov Ber collected himself and stood himself up, Rav Zalman Aaron stood in the higher ground and said, "Aha, see, I'm taller than you now." Their father, the Rebbe Maharash, Rav Shmuel of Lubavitch, the fourth Rebbe of Lubavitch, observed this episode, and he called the two boys inside. And he pulled over a chair, and he said to Rav Zalman Aaron, "Would you stand on the chair?" Which he did. And he said, "Tell me, who's taller now?" Rav Zalman Aaron said, "See, I'm taller." And Rav Shmuel says, "Aha, there you are. To be bigger than your friend, you don't need to put him into a ditch. All you need to do is pick yourself up. You don't need to put the other one down. You need to pick yourself up." And so the problem of the child engaging in bullying behavior being a way that they're covering up for their low self-esteem is not only in that they're harming other people or hurting other people with their behavior, it is that they aren't really solving the essence of their problem, which is making other people feel low doesn't actually address the inner need, the inner sense that I need to feel big. And so the way we can really help our children is by nurturing their self-worth, and by, and again, it's not a fix, but this is something which is necessary in this circumstance. nurturing their self-esteem, both as an antidote to the negativity they're experiencing, as when they are the recipient of bullying, or the self-esteem which may be underlying the one who is doing the bullying. And besides, it's, of course, as we said, it's a necessary thing to do in any case. I want to take a side note and just say why I have avoided or corrected myself when referring to a child as a bully. And this is something that my mother would tell us when we were children. And this is one of the ways that we can build healthy self-esteem in the context of criticism. And we'll be talking about discipline next week, Ritz Hashem. But at least for now, briefly, to point out the difference between calling a child a bully or calling a child a bad boy or a bad girl and saying, you're a good girl, but you did something bad. You're a good boy, but that wasn't the kind of thing that you should do. And in this way, we demonstrate that we are trying to preserve that child's self-worth while also even using that self-worth to motivate them to do better. So we're saying a boy like you doesn't do something like that. And you shouldn't do this, not because it makes you a bad boy or a bad girl. You shouldn't do this because a good boy doesn't do things like this. So let's talk a little bit more about to understand more deeply how to implement this. Let's talk a little bit more specifically about two different kinds of self-esteem. One type of self-esteem is personal competence, and the other is a sense of intrinsic self-worth. So we want our children to have a sense of competence, which is, I can do hard things. I can do things well, right? That this is about the things that I'm able to do. And that's a self-esteem that we call competence because it's connected to the things that I can do. And then there is self-worth, which isn't about what I can do, it's about that I am. I am intrinsically, essentially worth. I matter. I'm loved. Not only for what I can do, but simply for the fact that I am, that I exist. Excuse me. So a child who feels intrinsically worthy and feels competent, or a child that feels competent, even if they may not feel intrinsically worthy, are more likely to take risks. They will be motivated to work, they'll be motivated to accomplish, they'll be willing to try things because they believe that they can succeed. They'll be willing to take on challenges and look for ways to improve their life. If a child feels incompetent, if they don't believe in their ability to do hard things, then they're more likely to succeed, so why should I try? And sadly, a child's feeling of incompetence often has nothing to do with their actual competence. Some of the most intelligent and talented children and people and adults as well can struggle with feelings of low self-esteem. And actually, the more talented and intelligent a person is, research shows, paradoxically, they are more likely to doubt their own competence. So we want our children to feel competent because this will encourage them to take risks and to try hard things. What can we do to help our children feel more competent? Also, we want our children to have a sense of self-worth. And this is important. It's important to have these two together, because we never want our child to feel that their only worth in the world is the things that they can do well. We don't want them to, because that puts a very heavy burden on the child. It can affect their sense of freedom, and it can also affect their ability to try things, because the price of failure is so great. But just in general, we want our children to feel loved and valued for who they are. So let's think about some behaviors that we as parents can engage in to encourage our children's competence and to encourage our children's intrinsic self-worth. So, this is not a one-size-fits-all answer. And it isn't only about what we tell our children. We can tell them, I love you. It also has to come out in our behavior. So if we relate to our children as being competent and as mattering to us, as having an intrinsic self-worth, then that fosters that in them. I mean, one kind of basic example of a time when we show our children their intrinsic self-worth is that we celebrate their birthday, right? Celebrating our birthday tells a child, you matter just because you were born. It's not celebrating their good grades. It's not celebrating how smart or talented they are. It's simply celebrating the fact that they exist and telling them that they're loved for who they are. And this, of course, is something which is perhaps more understood in today's day and age, the importance to tell children that we love them unconditionally. But I think that something that we need to work more on as a society today is instilling in our children a feeling of competence. We tell children that they can be anything they want to be, or that we believe in them. But often we don't back that up with our behavior. And one of the ways that comes out, for example, is when we don't allow our children to do things that they're likely to fail at. When we don't allow them to lose. They have to experience the pain of loss, the pain of failure, and because that is tied to the joy and the success of accomplishment and achievement. We sometimes tell our children that they can be anything they want to be, but then we don't let them try. We tell them we're too worried about their safety, we're too worried about them, or we want to take care of it for them. We, solve their problems for them. One example of allowing a child to walk outside by themselves, of course, within reason, within a certain age, to ride their bike up and down the block, that is a feeling of competence. Allowing a child, sending a child to the store counter to pay for something, giving them that feeling that you can do this is an important competence. I mean, I was frustrated. I was trying to instill in my children the feeling of competence and good skills, and they had earned some money, and I was teaching them about tzedakah and savings, and we opened a bank account for them, and I wanted them to be able to go up to the teller and deposit their money in their bank account by themselves. And so I sat at the entrance to the bank, and I instructed them what to do, and I sent them up to the teller. And the teller wouldn't allow them to deposit their money on their own, which was very frustrating to me, because I think they would have had a very excited and fulfilling experience if they would have been able to get that independence and have that feeling of self-confidence. But Okay, we can't fix society, but we can certainly look for opportunities to give our children these chances to do things that express to them, that demonstrate to them that they, of different things that they're able to do. And certainly, um, pointing out when they are successful at chores and things like that are good examples of how we can put that into effect and to demonstrate to them uh, that they can do hard things. The Rebbe actually had advice for a child for some kind of educational difficulty, which we don't really know the background of it, but in a letter, he wrote that um, one factor in education, which he feels is rarely used and should be used more, is giving children a role of leadership with a group of younger children through some school activity and the like. And this can go a long way to encourage the child's self-confidence as well as making the child more sociable. And I can reflect on in my youth where being educated in the spirit of the Rebbe's teaching, we were at a fairly young age, as young tweens, we were given the opportunity to learn with younger children. And my sons also, they would pair up the eighth graders with first or second graders, and they would give them an opportunity to study in pairs where the older child is given the chance to teach a younger child. And this is such an important opportunity to give a child a sense of leadership and a sense of self-worth and a sense of competence, that not self-worth, but competence, that they can make a difference. The Rebbe made in another teaching talked about an innovative idea in which, when teaching children about the mitzvah of tzedakah, of charity, that have the children organize a charitable institution, charitable organization in their class, where the children would have a free loan fund and they would contribute their own money, perhaps, or have something that some kind of a benefit that they would be doing for the community, and that the children should be encouraged to form an organizational structure with a president and a treasurer and a secretary. And the Rebbe said that it would be best, this will give the child a sense of responsibility and personal commitment to the cause. In addition to contributing their own money, they would be contributing and volunteering. And aside, again, for the education of the importance of being a volunteer, it also instills in the child the sense of competence and the sense of accomplishment that they are capable of doing. And of course, the Rebbe suggested that these leadership positions should be rotated to give as many children as possible the chance to discover their own sense of competence. So, to summarize, when we're talking about the first quality of self-esteem, which is competence, the ability, the knowledge that I can be successful, as parents, we can be facilitators of helping our children be more competent by putting them in positions where they matter, where they feel that they're making a difference. And this can be scary for us because we can do it better ourselves, and we don't want our children to fail. But the rewards of giving our children those wings, that freedom, that independence, is priceless and necessary for the child. In looking to foster our child's feeling of competence, it's really important that, as Shlomo HaMelech taught, Chanoch lenar al pi darko, to educate the child according to their own way. And so it may be necessary to evaluate our child and to understand what are their strengths and what are they most good at, and to guide them in identifying what they're most good at, and that focusing on strength-based coaching of our child can really help to give them the strongest feeling of competence. Now, as parents, we may want to focus on our child's weakness, and that's necessary also to help build up their skills in places where they aren't as successful. But that's not the work in this moment, right? There is an equally important parenting strategy, which is identifying and highlighting for the child what they're good at and where they're most likely to be successful, because this will build a strong foundation of competence for the child. So I have a fascinating, just as a side, the Talmud talks about this, that if a child is born, the belief was that that if a child is born under a certain astrological sign, they'll have certain tendencies. So if a child is born under the sign of Mars, they will have violent tendencies. So the Talmud says if a child has these tendencies, child has violent tendencies because they're born under the sign of Mars, you should train that child to be a shochet, to be a ritual slaughterer or a moil, so that they can use that, they can channel that quality that they have into being into a positive effect. And again, it's strength-based training. One of the so I want to in this vein, when we're looking at the positive effects of strength-based training of our children, I want to share with you this really useful table that was provided to me by the Jewish Learning Institute about, and originates from Peterson and Seligman, two psychologists who are leaders in the positive psychology field. Psychology that looks not only to heal people's problems, but seeks to foster a greater sense of well-being. So Peterson and Seligman pointed out 24 character traits that people might have, and each of us will be, and our children will be stronger in some and not as strong in the others. And again, going back to this idea of the violent tendency, the moil and the shochet, the slaughterer and the circumciser, these character traits aren't good or bad. They each can be expressed they each can have positive or negative expressions. But again, we're going to be framing them in the positive sense, and because we're looking at building them up as strengths. So I'm going to share my screen here, and we'll go through the different traits that are discussed here. So 24 character traits, and you kind of want to think about it's obviously not a yes or no, it's a range. So some children are going to be more leaning to one or to the other. Creativity, thinking, and by the way, if you want a copy of this, send me a text or an email at rabbi@machanechadash.org, and I'll be happy to share this document with you for you to analyze your own children. Creativity, thinking of new and interesting ways to perceive and do things. This is in the general category of wisdom and knowledge. Curiosity, exploring and discovering, finding certain topics to be fascinating. Open-mindedness, being able to see things from different angles. Love of learning, right? Thirst for new knowledge. Perspective, having the ability to offer good advice. Okay, so that's category number one, and that was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 categories, five subcategories. Then there's courage. Is my child brave? Do they do the right thing even when it's not popular? Do they not back down from a challenge? Are they persistent? Do they have integrity? Are they genuine and sincere? Do they take responsibility for their actions? Do they have a lot of energy? Are they full of vitality? And then so that's category number 2, which was courage. Category number 3 is humanity, and the subcategories are love. Do they have close, loving relationships, kindness, social intelligence, being able to understand other people and where they come from, having a sense for how other people feel, having an instinct for how to behave in social situations. Okay. Then we have the category of justice. The subcategories are citizenship. Are you a good team player? Fairness. Do you treat people equally and give everyone a chance? Does a person have leadership skills? Okay. Then there's temperance, which is another category. Are they gracious, forgiveness, and mercy? Right? Do they give people a second chance? Do they have humility? They let their accomplishments speak for themselves. They're not braggarts. Are they prudent and thoughtful and careful? Are they well self-regulated? Are they in control of themselves? Okay. Then there is transcendence. By the way, one of my skills is not counting. So I've lost count of how many we're at. And I know this about myself, and I'm okay because I have a feeling of self-competence in other things, and I have an intrinsic feeling of self-worth in any case. Transcendence. Do they appreciate beauty and excellence? Do they notice the beautiful things in life? Do they have a sense for art and nature? Do they have gratitude? Are they prone to expressing gratefulness and good things in life? Hope. Are they hopeful? How hopeful are they? How humorous are they? How spiritually sensitive are they? Okay, so this is by thinking about these characteristics and identifying where my child fits in this, it helps us to identify the things that we might want to focus on when we're going to build up on their strengths and give them more opportunities to succeed and to feel successful in life. So that, again, that all goes back to the competence category. Now I want to focus on the intrinsic self-worth category. The intrinsic self-worth is perhaps most supported by a strong spiritual and godly lifestyle. When we have a godly perspective and we instill a godly perspective in our child, embedded in that is the sense that our child is special and matters. When we tell a child, you're doing a mitzvah, Hashem is watching you, we are giving a child a personal relationship with Hashem and telling them that they have a neshama, that they have a soul, tells them that they're holy. And of course, it isn't about what they do. We don't make our own neshama. I think as we come to the holiday of Shavuos, we think about the fact that Hashem gave us the Torah. Hashem chose us and gave us the Torah. That is to say, He recognized in us a holiness that we don't create through our fulfillment of the Torah and the mitzvahs. The Torah and the mitzvahs is something that we do because we're holy. We were told that we're a holy nation before getting the Torah. So persistently and consistently speaking about the neshama, the soul, and about God's love for every Jew and for every person, and reminding the child that their mitzvahs are between them and Hashem, are ways in which we help to foster the child's self-concept, a healthy self-concept that's tied to the most deep and enduring and eternal quality, where in the most phenomenal way, in the way that matters most in the universe, we're telling this child that they matter. And the Torah really does strengthen this. And we talk about the neshama as being a part of Hashem. You have a part of Hashem in you. And this means, again, that no matter what, you are loved by Hashem and you matter. As a result of this, to go back to the point we made earlier, it follows that a person that's as special as you and as holy as you should behave in a way that reflects that. So, and of course, as parents, we also demonstrate that in our personal expressions of love to our children, telling them that we love them unconditionally, and at the same time, the spiritual quality of that child's inherent self-worth is even deeper than the love of their parent. A parent is flawed, and the love of a parent, no matter how great it is, isn't as great as the love that Hashem has for each and every one of us. So let's summarize what we said today. Number one, self-esteem is a big determinant in whether our children will be emotionally stable and happy. Number two, self-esteem is a big factor in our psychological survival, and also in our spiritual growth. We talked a little bit about bullying and how low self-esteem is a big risk factor for bullying behavior and experiencing bullying behavior. We talked about the two factors of bullying, of self-esteem, which is competence and self-worth. Competence being that you can do well, and self-worth means you matter because you are who you are. We said that the most effective way to build up a child's feeling of competence is to give them chances to do things, to treat them as competent. And we can do that by giving them positions of responsibility and leadership. We also said that in order for a child to feel competent, we want to identify their strengths and their tendencies, and to steer them in that direction where they're more likely to see success, or to identify those success and strength building domains where they are most prone to experiencing success. And finally, one of the ways that we can demonstrate our intrinsic love for our children and their self-worth is by telling each of our children that we love them unconditionally, and by not differentiating between our children, not showing that one of them is better than the other, not comparing our children or contrasting them to one another in a sense of self-worth, never calling a child a bad boy or a bad girl, and also by highlighting the love that Hashem has for each child and for each person, which is eternal and beyond even the love that we have for our children. With Hashem's help, next week we're going to talk about feedback and consequences, discipline and guidance techniques for dealing not with our children's strength, but for dealing with ways in which they need to improve and overcome difficult behavior. Thank you for watching and hope to see you next time.